Rainier Valley Historical Society's mission is to collect, preserve, exhibit, and interpret the history and heritage of Rainier Valley and its people, and to promote public involvement in and appreciation of its history and culture. Our geographic boundaries are from Dearborn Street to the city limits and from I-5 to Lake Washington. Our office is located at 3710 South Ferdinand Street in the Columbia City neighborhood of Seattle.
I'm Golda Simon, born Gail Simon, in 1954 in Brooklyn, New York. And I actually was called Golda because my family named me Gail to fit in with the assimilated times, but Golda is my Jewish name, and that was an endearment that was used till I was about 3 or 4. And I took on again recently because it's just more of who I am. And I moved to Seattle 16 years ago because I'd never lived anywhere but New York, and it was time to move on. And food has always been important to me. I think it's just part of who I am and my identity, my learning about food and cooking just from families and family celebrations and things. So it's kind of tied to my Jewish identity, I suppose, also, even though I cook a lot more than, quote, Jewish foods, unquote. My parents live in the Rainier Valley also, just on the other side of Rainier, for the last year. And that has gotten me to reminisce a lot about food, family, values of importance to me, and things like that, especially when holidays roll around. And I probably think about food a lot more than the average person.
Tell a little bit about some of those memories and values in the food. When it's Passover, I'm assuming that's one of the things.
Yeah, well, I've been mostly vegetarian for the last 20, gosh, 5, I'm going to lose the math here. It's like 25 years. And I found myself cooking this huge pot of chicken soup with matzo balls this week to bring over to my parents, who don't do much. Well, my mother doesn't do any cooking anymore. And chicken soup with matzo balls isn't something my father has decided to learn. And it was just an experience to be cooking that kind of a old-fashioned meal. And the pot was barely big enough for the chicken and all the vegetables and everything I had to put in. And I grew up mostly on canned foods in the 50s, and except for a few odd things like parsley, dill, and parsnips that I knew fresh because they were really important to the soups, Eastern European Jewish tradition. So I had all those things around this week, and it's sort of like bringing spring into my life, and it's just a good feeling to have all that stuff around, and just also served some soup to another kind of soup to a friend last night, and told it as the family soup. And we don't have a whole lot of heirlooms in my family, but I describe this as our, the soup is my aunt made it, my grandma made it, my mother made it, I make it, and it's the family soup. It's a split pea barley vegetable with parsley and dill and parsnips, and it feels nice to have that. It feels important and like a treasure. to have my family memories, since my idea of family is kind of maybe a less than traditional kind of definition of family. So things like memories and food are real important to me. I'll talk about what I do now, or you'll ask me.
Can you, well, it's sort of interesting. It sounds like you're like, oh, this is all very important and has been important in your family going back, and yet you said you grew up on the CPEC. So do you feel like there was a glitch there?
Well, for the same reason I was named Gail and called Golda, I think it was that struggle with assimilation versus tradition. You know, that we were probably Americans first, Jews second, and you know, for any important any occasion where anybody came over, there was homemade soup and more, you know, but it was always, but dinners during the week was always canned vegetables and canned fruit, and sometimes canned soup, you know, in addition to the meat, potatoes, and but you know, if it didn't come in a can and it wasn't going in a soup, we really didn't, except for lettuce, tomato, and cucumber, we didn't have it raw. So I think it was just about the times.
Can you talk a little bit? Will you tell me a little bit about the Passover? So you're kind of what does that mean for you and your family?
I, as an adult, am a lot more culturally observant than my family is. And my family, I think, did a lot of things to teach us about the culture, but they didn't do much after we all moved out. And my father came from a very assimilated Jewish family where they did not speak Yiddish in their home. They did not observe kosher food restrictions, and they didn't celebrate Jewish holidays. And my mother came from a very observant home. So my father married her and became more observant. You know, he kind of, the household was run more according to her beliefs rather than his. And we celebrated holidays around food with our family on my mother's side. Sister, and she had 5 siblings, and we always got together for dinners and things like that. So the food was important, and I guess I hung around the kitchen more than in front of the TV with the ball games. And no one actually ever sat me down and said, "This is how you cook anything." But everything was the same every year, you know. And we didn't have potato latkes, potato pancakes as they are known in English, for Hanukkah, which is traditional. We had them for Passover because we liked them, I guess, because and Gertie had enough of an audience to enjoy being watched making, you know, dozens of potato latkes for Passover dinner. So we have that for Passover, and when I went off on my own, I gathered with Jewish women friends over Passover, especially, and Jewish New Year and Hanukkah, but especially Passover was because it had a lot of political reference to it, and it was a holiday that even secular Jews and non-religious, you know, Jews or Jews of all different Jewish paths come together and celebrate the idea of freedom and creating a better world, and gathering together with people from different faiths and different backgrounds to make a better world. So we developed our own rituals, and we brought with us, you know, the foods that we had, but we also brought with us variations of a lot of vegetarian dinners. So we still have the kugels, the translates to a pudding, but more of a savory pudding or baked pancake. It's kind of hard to describe some of these things in English. But kugels are German. People know German food; they would know kugel. And the soups and just the memories, I guess, and all the vegetarian dishes without the chicken. What many of us have done over the Seder plate, which houses all of the ritual symbols of the holiday, is instead of the shank bone, we put in a beet to represent the Paschal lamb. Yeah, and it's important to me to be thoughtful about what I do and what I feed myself and what I feed others. I think it kind of fits into just my whole philosophy of life.
Well, so I think like now you have to have sort of like one is more about your philosophy of life and food and like listening to it. The other is kind of how you started learning to.
If you ask me to think about my philosophy on food, I kind of panicked because I thought, they asked you this in cooking school a lot, and it's like, I never knew what to say, and I was really pleased that I came up with an answer that kind of felt right. So I'm eager to share it with you. You can use it or not, but I'm thinking that my philosophy on food very much matches my philosophy on life, which rotates around the idea of living simply with an awareness of being earth friendly. So eating as low down on the food chain, being as vegetarian as I can be is important to me. Even as simple as eating off real plates and not paper plates. I gather with a group of Jewish lesbians each year and our friends and children, and we bring our own dishes, rather than bringing paper plates and picnics and things like that. But importantly, to have a wide vision of beyond myself. And that's why I enjoy feeding people, because it's a way to connect over barriers. And I'm not someone who's traveled a lot, and I feel like I've learned a lot about the world through food, through reading about foods of different places and cooking shows on TV and eating in different restaurants that we're lucky enough to have in Seattle, and learning a lot about people and climates and culture through food. And oh gosh, I teach cooking classes, and I feel it's really important to have some sense of what I'm talking about. I don't do it lightly. I take it with a lot of respect that I'm taking the food of someone else's culture that I know very little about, but I do research. So, and it's kind of funny because as a vegetarian, it's kind of hard to find some vegetarian dishes. I did a class on foods from different Asian countries, and one was pancit from the Philippines. So I went to different buffet restaurants on Beacon Avenue, looking for their pancit and taking home different kinds and made mine look like it, even though I wasn't putting any meat in it. So at least I get the same kind of noodles and vegetables, cut them the same way, season them similarly, except for the pork, and do what I could, talk to people. One family I work with is Filipino, and she gave me her mother's sisters and her own variations of pancit, and just try to educate myself in that way. And I just love to eat in all the different kinds of restaurants around. Thai, Malaysian place that unfortunately burnt down, and Vietnamese foods and try to, note the variations and the differences. And I shop in Asian stores and Middle Eastern stores and Indian stores, and I enjoy just knowing all about the spices and to try to kind of broaden my contact with people who have more to offer me, even if it's only as much as shopping with them in a supermarket or something. But it feels important to me.
Will you tell me a little bit more about how you got? Sounds like you were hanging around the kitchen a lot as a child. Is that how you got started?
Always underfoot is what I remember. Well, I was the youngest of three, and I remember just really wanting to go to school with my sister and brother, but I was home, and my mother was home. And I don't really, as I said, no one ever sat me down and said, this is how you make this or that. But I suppose we gravitate toward what's important to us. And also, astrologically, I'm Cancer. And a lot of that, I think, connects me to home and hearth and home. So I'm comfortable in the house, and I love to make my home comfortable. And food fits in there pretty well. So I don't know. I lived home through most of college, and I became vegetarian before I moved out. So I started cooking, and I just started adapting the things that my mother made that I liked, like stuffed cabbage rolls, and made them without meat and stuff like that. But made them sweet and sour like my mother did. So the flavors were the same, but the feeling was different.
So then you continued to cook
Yeah, all three of the siblings became vegetarian. Interestingly enough, in the mid-70s.
like that was part of the time.
It was also lucky, I think, to be influenced by some of the people who I was influenced by. I was just 20, and it was good. Well, there was this old woman, Kate, who lived in the building where my sister and brother-in-law lived, and she was a fruitarian, and she followed the belief system of the philosophy of natural hygiene, which not a lot of people know about. Bernard Jensen and Dr. Curcio, I can't remember his first name. And these guys were jailed in the 50s for practicing medicine without a license, so to speak, because they were so alternative. And they were promoting vegetarianism and whole foods and less processed foods and, most of your foods from raw juices and salads and simply steamed foods and the healing and prevention of disease through food. And it was very radical in the 50s and even in the 70s. So we were influenced by those folks to eat very simply and very purely. And I've, done my own variations since shortly after that, but was glad for the introduction to it. And it's also, I think, led me toward gardening, being a city gardener, having grown up in a city housing project in Brooklyn. We were the first organic garden. There was a program that the Brooklyn Botanic Garden sponsored. My brother found out about it, and it was a garden project. And they had been having flower gardens, but now they were encouraging vegetable gardens. And I was living away from the house, but would ride by on my bicycle, and my sister and brother would come in. They were also living out of the house, and they built this organic vegetable garden in the grass underneath this 8-story building, and actually won an honorable mention for the organic garden in the New York City housing project in like 1970. or something. 75. It was great. And no more green. There were no canned green beans that summer, only fresh ones. And my parents helped, and they were well into their 60s by then. And it was great. It was just really good time.
We continue to garden and grow vegetables. I've seen something great.
More in yes, we'll say yes for the occasion. More in theory than practice sometimes. Yeah, it's my moving out of New York was my eagerness about moving out of New York was enhanced by the prospect of having a garden and living closer to the earth. And I've grown everything from raspberries to cylindrical beets, Vietnamese cilantro, and parsnips. They're really skinny, but they can be done. Yeah, and I like the years that I had chard and kale all winter long, and I'd like to eat, a lot more out of my garden than I can. One day when I have more time to spend gardening.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got into teaching? Yeah, turn it off.
I think from it.
I mean, it's fine to have a pause, or you can turn it off.
Let's turn it off.
What we were talking about, sort of the political aspect of the Seder and how it's about liberation. And I was saying that the Seders that I've been to have all been this kind of hippie Seders, very leftist. And they definitely gave us this orange on the Seder plate.
Right, and I asked I said I bet this orange was not on the Seder plate 5 years ago. And what was the story you heard about the orange? I know this is your
that there was somebody that said that a woman belongs as a rabbi as much as an orange belongs on the Seder plate, and so that people started putting orange on the Seder plate to show that they wanted to do that.
Well,
have a different variation.
I'm glad to see that there's oranges on the Seder plates in a kind of widespread manner. A couple of years ago, there were a lot of stories about it on the internet, and I don't remember all the. I'd like to go find what I had learned. It was a very interesting story. But what I remembered about it was that it was something about lesbians and Jewish participating in Jewish rituals, not just women, but it's a controversial in itself about Jewish women in Orthodoxy at any level. But a lot of Orthodox Jewish women have found ways to find themselves involved because they see themselves as important parts of the Jewish community outside the kitchen and the children. But yes, lots of us are putting oranges on our Seder plates now. I don't know if you want to use that. That's really significant. But,
well, I'm just curious because I've often wondered, in a more conservative Jewish home, how much of what I'm familiar with as kind of this leftist liberation stuff, how much of that is part of this. I mean, it is a story about liberation, obviously, so there must be something there. But I'm wondering, like, in a more conservative Jewish home, how would it be? How would it come out?
well, many of them people are still using the same Haggadah that they were using, 50 years ago. And what I like about the Haggadah, the story of Passover, the guidebook that you used for the Seder, I don't know. It's just there's the potluck culture. I suppose any lesbian around the country, and I don't know about the world, but around this country will tell you that you you can't go to a lesbian gathering without a potluck um, once in a while. And around all the Friday night gatherings we've had here around, there's been a Jewish lesbian Shabbat group, as we've called it, since about '87. A very loose group that's kind of ebbed and flowed over the years, and came out of a lesbian feminist conference that happened in Seattle. And after that, we meeting on Fridays about once a month for food and discussion and simple candlelighting observance. And they were like very unplanned, potluck. The person who hosts would have challah and grape juice and wine. Always very conscious of sober people. Make sure you have grape juice on hand. And the candles. And everything else was just up for whoever brought. And most of the time, I'd say 95% of the time, it always turned out great. Once in a while, we'd have more desserts and not much else. Many desserts and not much else. Or you'd have 3 salads and, some lots of bread. But usually it just worked out that sometimes you knew who would bring what. You knew who worked to the last minute and came in with, a cake or juice, drinks. You knew that Leah always brought a salad because she gardened all year round. And you could always count on that. And I don't know. I'm not very well received if I just walk in with a bottle of juice. I have a reputation as showing up with something more substantial. So, yes, our celebrations, in the Jewish community always are around food, for sure. As well as talk and dancing. Those are always the things we like to bring to the bigger celebrations. There's a cookbook. There's several cookbooks with the word lesbian in them. I don't know if this makes good family reading. The one I had in mind is a lesbian erotic cookbook.
Go on.
Somebody got an idea and she got very campy and she put together this great book with very creative recipe names. They're just real recipes, but it's the editorials and the titles of them and the photos. They're pretty intriguing. Actually, that is the only cookbook I can think of that has the word lesbian in it. It's kind of funny. That's all I can think of now to say on lesbians and food. There's a group, an arm of the Pride Foundation that's funding women to become more involved in developing. Oh gosh. So anyway, this they're doing trainings for women who want to become community organizers. And it's women who are working with groups that already exist and to branch out and do specific programs that enhance the lives of lesbians and get lesbian women involved in community organizing. So I had this idea to do something around cooking classes around certain health issues, maybe for lesbians, or cooking classes for lesbians with children, and for the children too, kind of mommy and me classes and stuff. I don't have a group to work out of, so I couldn't do that yet. It has to be out of some existing group. But this is an idea because for different reasons, a lot of times lesbians don't join the mainstream groups. Sometimes it's financial stuff, especially single moms, and some because it's not always safe to be out. Sometimes people just don't get involved in community groups and community centers, especially with kids, in terms of wanting to protect their kids and not being safe, feeling safe being out. So some of us thought that there'd be a real response and a real need for this kind of thing in the lesbian community. So for some future date, maybe I will do something like that.
Can you say a little bit about organic stuff, like why that's important?
Well, I guess back to my philosophy on food and life. Simple and as natural as possible. The word natural has gotten kind of misused, overused. Just anything that grows isn't natural because it could be grown with a lot of poisons. I think the organic movement is a real important one in this country as a counter movement to other pesticides that have been, and probably always will be used on the food because it makes more profit. And growing things yourself is no reason to really not grow organically. It's very expensive to eat organically, and it's always a dilemma of mine. So another reason I try to grow what I eat. And it just fits into my philosophy of doing things, in the gentlest way for the earth as well as for myself and others that I would feed. Yeah, and I also, these days, I realize that organic's not enough because you could find cookies. The first ingredient is white organic sugar. The second ingredient is white organic flour. It still could have artificial flavors and things in it. So organic isn't enough. I like to eat as much of whole grains and whole foods and less processed foods as I can. And I know it's important for people to just get enough food, though. I don't use this as a judgment because, as I say, I can't afford to eat, all organic myself, and I know that the first thing is for people to just fill their tummies and those of their children.
I think we kind of covered the basic areas that I was going to ask you about, but I wonder if you felt
I wondered if there was some way to be more specific about the neighborhood.
Okay, yeah,
or something like that. Are you gearing things toward that?
Yeah.
Well, I've lived in the Rainier Valley since '88 and consciously chose to move down here from the north end of Seattle and East Lake and other places I just happened to live in as a new person in Seattle. And I wanted to live with more diversity, economic and social and ethnic diversity than I was getting in other parts of Seattle. And I live in the neighborhood, work in the neighborhood now. I'm pleased to say that. And I shop in the neighborhood. And I've been doing food demonstrations at the farmers market. And one of the projects I did with kids while I was still in school was an after-school cooking program at the Beacon Hill Library. And I put that in with the other stuff I said earlier. And that was great. I did that for over a year. And the librarian there, Diane Cowles, I believe her name was really the one who started this idea. And I would go in the back room on Wednesday afternoons and just do sandwiches, sweets, salads, dips, and celery sticks, and all kinds of stuff with the kids. And it was ages like 4 to 10. It was really, really good. And I like working in the neighborhood. I'm, I guess, a real community-oriented person, and I'm glad to see the farmers market, and I do demos there. And I don't have a restaurant, and I don't have a big name, but I think it's really important to just get people up on that stage who are living in the neighborhood and community oriented. It's not to say that, you see, if people really like the big restaurants and stuff, I think there's enough in our neighborhood that we can pull exclusively from that. And I'd like to see more people who are not, quote, professional chefs come out and share their food abilities at the farmers market and places like that. Or the community center, stuff like that.
Do you, when you moved here, is that 88?
I moved here in 85. I moved in the neighborhood in 88, yeah.
So at that time, that was kind of when it was is that right? Or did you have that same community?
Unfortunately, some people still think of it now as I'm interviewing for a housemate. People don't want to live in the bad neighborhood. I always cringed at hearing people say, why would you want to live down there? Isn't that an unsafe neighborhood? And I think ignorance is one of the worst evils next to poverty in the world. And I moved from New York, and even though I left New York, I'm really grateful that I grew up in New York. And though I do not have, by any means, as an extensive assortment of, I'm not sure assortment's the right word, a varied group of friends, that I do not have as varied a group of friends as I believe I would like. I need to surround myself with a variety of things. I never felt that this was a bad neighborhood. I think a bad neighborhood is by people who bring their fear and ignorance into a neighborhood. And I think any neighborhood is a neighborhood you can get raped and robbed and, shot in. And the more you know of your friends and your neighbors and shop and live in your neighborhood, the safer you're going to feel. And you take the precautions you take anyway. On my street, we leave our car unlocked, and it saved us a lot of money and broken windshields and broken glass windows, because if someone wants to take something, we don't leave much in the car now. We just leave it unlocked, and they don't break the windows, and they scourge around and find some change and then leave, every November. But it's attitude. I think actually, what I see as more of a problem in this neighborhood is the fact that it's becoming more upper class. And what's happening is that the people who've been here for generations can't afford to live here anymore. And if that makes a better neighborhood with a Starbucks every 3 blocks, then that's not the neighborhood I'm going to want to stay in. Community means, small, independent, for the people and by the people. And I'd like to, see people spilling out of the few independently owned stores that still exist in our area. It's sad to me that when I want to go for a quick meal, if it's not an Asian restaurant, I can't eat anywhere in the neighborhood. There's a variety of restaurants, but you can't go and have a dinner and a beverage and tax and tip on you $10 anywhere. And you can't. It's not family oriented. It's like a destination restaurant. I don't want to live in a neighborhood of destination restaurants. Not when Columbia City was, what it was for so long. So that's my theory on neighborhoods.
If I was going to include, like a couple recipes for you, what would, you don't have to give them to me today, but
What would reflect me?
The classic Golda recipe.
Might have to put the family soup in
I was
there.
thinking that sounds really good. That's soupy.
Yes, the green barley vegetable. Yeah. And you know what's funny? I don't know if I've ever written it up. I probably never make it exactly the same way. I could give Mama's recipe, which is just throw everything in the pressure cooker. She didn't saute a thing. You just all threw it all in the pressure cooker. And it's fat free, except for the meat bones, but they're optional. The soup and some kind of a salad, I think. Maybe my grated salad, or yeah, everybody else has a wild green salad. That's not traditional in my head, but I could have some kind of a salad. Or my sweet and white potato salad, or I don't know, or the stuffed cabbage, but maybe things people would be apt to make. You know, how many people can actually make the stuffed cabbage?
I don't know what you're doing. Well, I'll be tracking you down.
Okay, that'll be great. Yeah. Well, thank you.